Old Glover.
Yeah.
So I guess it really turned a corner and like set us on the pace I think we're going to be on for the rest of this season with the shortened season, especially with only 7 episodes. I think, now we're going to be moving at a breakneck speed toward whatever the finale is going to be, especially now Danny kind of kicked us off and has the painted table at her fingertips.
Yeah.
I feel like from a pacing perspective, this episode is really difficult. And I feel like from the people I've talked to, they're giving it a lot of criticism because it felt like nothing happened. But I think everybody expected some big deaths or some really big battle scenes to happen in the very first episode.
Yeah.
And if you look at like Game of Thrones as an entirety, most of it is politics and creating allies. And we learned a ton about characters that I think we'll get into in a minute. But from my perspective, like you said, it had to set the stage, but we also learned a ton. And essentially the entire Frey family died. So
there was a lot of death.
Yeah. I thought it was pretty badass. And I think we have to remember, like, if you look at the last 2 episodes of season 6, it's like massive battle scene. Holy shit, she blew up the highest sept or whatever the hell that building's called. I never figured it out. Anyways, tons of people died in both episodes, right? Like completely like wiped out families in general. And it changed the shape of what we're looking at. And now everybody's there. And now it's like game on, but there's still a lot of back end to happen between all of the people that are most powerful.
Yeah, and I think I brought this up to you too today, Joe. Here's where we're at right now with the series is we're left with a lot of fan favorite characters. That's not going to stop Game of Thrones, we know, from killing off anybody. I mean, they could do it next episode. But what we're so close now to the final confrontations that as viewers, you got to, if you're the writers, you got to balance this. It's a balancing act to get to the point where you want to have, the most badass rosters you can going into these final battles. That if, somebody like Tormund dies tomorrow, you'd be really bummed if we got to that fight with the White Walkers and, Tormund's not a part of it. Or, if Jaime died, because tomorrow in next week's episode, Cersei decides that she doesn't trust him and wants him dead. Then we get to that battle at King's Landing. You're like, oh, well, why isn't Jaime here? So it's going to be. I don't think we're going to get a lot of deaths throughout this season, but I think we'll get a lot of deaths when we get to that battle scene.
30 minutes, five main
characters gone.
All done. All done.
Yeah.
We're done. Well, and the important thing to remember about this episode is it kind of frames. So up until this point, we've had the action kind of taking place on 2 continents.
Yeah.
It's never been this centralized before. You've always had Daenerys over in Yunkai and Astapor, Marine. But now, for the first time ever, all the major players are on the same continent. And it's huge, don't get me wrong. One of the things that kind of going back and watching the episodes again has helped me realize is, so in the summer, in the very first episode, the trek from King's Landing to Winterfell in the summer took 6 months.
Oh, yeah.
So, this is a huge place. So, sure, we're all in one place again, but it's going to take a lot of time to move all the pieces around.
Well,
Right.
and that brings up a great point because if you think about what Jaime's concern is with their troops to march north to take on Jon, if it took 6 months in the summer, holy crap, it could take forever, and they don't have the supplies or resources to do it. So
And
he's
it's-
obviously very nervous.
And what you're looking at with kind of the comparison, I was thinking about this earlier today. Actually, it's so. In the first episode, you had just the royal family and their guards moving north. They're going to be able to move a lot quicker than you're able to move an entire army north.
Yeah.
So this is going to be. It's going to be interesting to see how they do all this, because there's going to be an element of just time that takes to move all the forces around. And granted, there's probably teleporters that exist, but you can't teleport 40,000 men at once.
We came up with what we think is the obvious answer to the end of this season, to the end of the 2 main battles that we see happening. So I think the payoff to this season. And we're getting out of the episode right now into sort of prediction land. But the payoff to this season, I think, is going to be the battle between Daenerys and Cersei in King's Landing. And I think ultimately Cersei and the Lannisters are going to fall. And Daenerys will be sitting on the Iron Throne at the start of the next season. And then it's going to be, okay, Jon Snow has to now team up with the current queen to stop the attack on the White Walkers. You know what I mean? But is that too safe? I mean, doesn't that seem almost
It's too simple.
too simple?
It's too simple for what we've come to know.
From Game of Thrones, yeah.
And I mean, there's so many other options in play here. I mean, and the big one that keeps standing out in my mind is, what's Littlefinger going to do?
Fucking yeah, the wild cards.
And keep in mind, he is the one who is in charge, who commands the Knights of the Vale, who saved Jon Snow during the Battle of the Bastards. That's a huge force. Like, Jon Snow would not be alive to be the King of the North without the Knights of the Vale.
Yep.
And is Littlefinger just going to fade into obscurity? No. So there's going to be, like, inner conflict, I think, within all of the major factions that are still on the table.
One of the interesting things from this episode, too, was the interplay between Littlefinger and Sansa. So I think a lot of predictions leading into this season was going to be like, what's the divide going to be like between Jon Snow and Sansa? Like, there's obviously like some growing tension that Sansa doesn't feel like she's being treated as an equal, and she's been through so much shit that at this point she is, a intellectual and political powerhouse because of the things that she's been exposed to, and so she wants a seat at the table with Jon. And so we kind of saw like maybe she's going to be jealous, and there's going to be this divide that happens. But I kind of thought that after this episode, like she did enough of like putting Baelish Littlefinger in his place, where he came up and tried to do his little fucking whispers thing again, and she was like, no, shut up, like I get it, like let me talk to Jon. And then they had like a really honest conversation, I thought, Jon and Sansa, where Sansa was like, hey, you kind of shit on me in there, like what was up? And he's like, well, this is why. And she's like, no, but you need to trust me, and this is why. And then Jon was like, okay. And so it was kind of like this like really amicable, like civil conversation that maybe is kind of like a ha-ha to us for thinking that the Starks were malleable enough. Maybe we're seeing now that like they're too strong to fall to Littlefinger. Maybe that's what I want to think.
Yeah, very strong political statements from Sansa, considering she said like it would be silly to think that, or you shouldn't be a ruler if nobody can stand up to you, something to that regard.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then for Littlefinger to come out of the shadows and her to be like, yeah, get out of here. I think he always preyed on her insecurity and her feeling like other people could protect her, and now she doesn't feel that way anymore, right? So she's trying to take it into her own, I don't know, as much just own it herself as she can, because she knows she's by herself. And then, a lot of people want to compare her to like, and the things she mentioned about Cersei in this episode, I think are very... It's almost overstated, because what you're saying is like her and Jon seem on the same page, and I think they are, and I think everybody kind of thinks the Stark family will eventually fall apart, but it feels like they're trying to hold together because they still understand what the end goals look like if they're not in power, right? It's either Cersei or the White Walkers, and that just seems like shitty.
Yeah, and so as a fan of the Starks, I consider myself from House Stark. As a fan of the Starks, like I want to see them beat that political battle. Like it's almost like as challenging of a battle for them to overcome as an open field fight against the Boltons. Like it's this idea that they can't be swayed by someone as manipulative as Littlefinger. Like they'll overcome that too. And if they can overcome that and they can win on the battlefield, then it's like this is why the Starks need to be taken seriously.
And Jon gets that it's a numbers game. Like the White Walkers have been just counting the wildlings that they've been killing north of the Wall to add to their army, and now it's like everybody needs to decide that this is the common enemy, and they touch on the fact that like, well, the Cersei's south, and he's like, that's 1,000 miles away, I don't care about that. And she's like, well, there's a wall here, and he's like, you haven't seen the Night King. This shit is scary,
Rapid fire, let's talk about a couple other things we really enjoyed from the episode. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the Hound, which was kind of the surprise storyline, I think, from this episode.
That was only maybe like 10 minutes of the show?
Yeah.
But to me, there was a really, I think individually, a lot of those scenes and character developments really stood out. And, I mean, just to see, the Hound is just like sassy and bitter.
Yep.
His back and forth with Beric Dondarrion and Thoros of Myr, it was just so funny.
They're my new favorite crew to watch. Yeah. Like the three of them are amazing, and I can't wait to see them eventually join with the North. Like that's where they're going, and they're going to meet up with Jon and Brienne and Tormund. Like it's going to be an all-star team. I think we talked about it a little bit on our last episode. But to see the Hound have like these genuine emotions of like regret and remorse, where like before, you know, he was totally like this hardened killer.
But he wasn't.
Right. He had
You
some
know,
ethos.
in one of the, I think it was the third episode of the show run, actually, it was where the Mountain and Loras Tyrell were jousting at the tournament to, you know, welcome Ned Stark as new Hand of the King.
I forgot
Man,
Loras
so long
Tyrell
ago, right? Like,
and
this
the
is a
Mountain
long time
jousted.
ago.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
So one of the horses when it's in heat, and it's kind of implied that someone cheated to make the anyway. But the Mountain like charges at Loras, and the Hound gets in the way because he's like, "This is not okay." Like this is a guy who, as gruff and as mean and as bitter as he may try to put himself out to be, he does have a very strong idea of what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah.
And I think. You know, his character arc is now at the point where he realizes that, you know, there's some bigger stuff out there than just the royalty and, you know, high lords and ladies like fighting each other. That scene where he was able to look into the fire and see something, that was huge.
Yeah.
Because like he's afraid of fire, and like just seeing that, and he was, I feel. And you know, the actor did a great job. He portrayed that he was more afraid of what he saw in the fire than of the fire itself.
Yep, that's true.
And that's huge.
You could see that too in his face and how he reacted to that. I think like, you know, we are still barreling towards my most anticipated part of this show, which is Clegane Bowl. I want to see it so bad. I want to see the Mountain versus the Hound. I know we have to get it. We absolutely have to get that payoff. But I think now, where before maybe that face-off wouldn't have felt earned from like a character perspective, it would have just been like the brothers being brothers, and obviously the Hound hates the Mountain because, you know, the Mountain burned his face when he was kids because he played with his toy or whatever the backstory is there. Now it feels earned because we've seen this character transformation in the Hound, and to your point, like now he realizes that there's more to live for than survival. Like now he realizes that, like, you know, he has remorse and genuine regret, and you started to see that character transformation when he was with Arya, and you saw it sort of solidified when he came back to that village or that house, that farm where he had robbed that guy before, unremorseful, and Arya's like, "What are you doing? They're going to die." And he's like, "He's going to die anyway." And then now that he actually saw that firsthand, he saw for the first time maybe the results of his actions, right? And so that was just a really cool way to see that sort of come to a new interest point for the Hound.
I think for like those three, Beric, Thoros, and the Hound, are by far, every time they're on screen anymore, I just want more of it because I felt like we weren't given much, and it's obviously a really mysterious topic, but like Beric being risen from the dead multiple times and Thoros believing in what's happening there. I think like the Hound then buying into that is so earth-shattering as a watcher because of his character arc and him and Jaime, and what Game of Thrones and George R. R. Martin does so well is like create this tension or this hatred for people and then decide like, okay, they're human and they have human flaw and this is how they were raised or whatever, and now you see their inside or their like heartbeat, right? And now it's like, if the Hound buys into this, what does that mean for him as a key player in the future? Because those three guys are super powerful. They're all really great warriors. They're really powerful people. And I think they also stand for a greater something, because obviously if the Lord of Light is continuing to bring them back or bring them together, it means something bigger. And for him to go out and bury the people that he just left behind, you know, we would have never seen that in a million years in the past. And I think that shows you that he cares about something bigger than, right? It's not just like about those people.
Absolutely. Another quick mention. I've seen the internet going crazy about Ed Sheeran's cameo.
It was so good.
I loved it. Yeah, I liked it a lot.
It was one of the most humanizing moments in the entire series. And like, okay, Ed Sheeran, whatever. You know, like him, don't like him.
You could have picked any pop star.
You could have picked any pop star.
Yeah.
It didn't matter that it was Ed Sheeran, but I just thought it was really, really good that, like, all of a sudden you're seeing, like, here's the everyman. Like, these are just soldiers. These are Lannister soldiers.
But they have hopes and they have dreams and they have families.
Wives, and, like, they're just all caught up in all this. And it's like, okay, yeah, this is what it's actually like.
But do you know what was so like my favorite part about that scene though was still how tense I felt the whole time. Like I said, when Arya sat down there, you were like, "Is she going to kill all of them? Are they planning a trap to kill Arya?"